£234 billion. That is what the British taxpayer is currently going to have to pay for a specific problem within our immigration system. And in this video, I'm just going to explain where this utterly mind-boggling number came from, and to be frank, why you, the British taxpayer, and people across the West should really care about what is happening right now in Britain's immigration system. Now, I've just written about this over at my Substack, mattgoodwin.org, but what I'm about to tell you really goes to the root of one of the big problems in our country. The story starts with Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and what happened under that Conservative government during the COVID pandemic. Now, many of you will know my view. I think Boris Johnson betrayed the country. I think he betrayed his own voters. He promised Britain that he would deliver a high-skill immigration policy with, and I quote direct, lower overall numbers. Remember, that was in the Conservative Manifesto 2019. It's what Boris Johnson talked about. He talked about engineers, rocket scientists, people coming over from Canada, America, Australia. What Boris Johnson gave us, though, and what the hapless Keir Starmer, our current Labour Prime Minister, is continuing, was the opposite of that. What the Tories gave us was masses of low-skill, low-wage migration from outside of Europe. 86% of all migration now into Britain is coming from outside of Europe, from culturally very different, if not incompatible nations like Nigeria, China, Pakistan, Zimbabwe. And what I'm about to show you in this video are really the numbers behind this absolutely insane experiment, and the costs that you're going to have to pay unless we can convince our political parties and the Labour government, or we can just apply enough pressure through Nigel Farage and reform to change the current direction of travel. Here are just a couple of numbers for you. Between 2021 and 2024, Britain gave out nearly 4 million visas, right? And it gave out actually around, if you take away all the people that left the country, that came back and so on, it gave out about 2 million long-term visas, okay? Of those visas, only 1 in 20 went to high-skill workers. Just 5% of the visas we gave out between 21 and 24, long-term visas, went to high-skill workers. 5%. And that equates to about 200,000 people. Okay, and we've had about 2.5, 3 million people come into the country. Now, they brought with them about 150,000 of their relatives. Okay, so what ends up happening is, who are the rest? Well, the rest are low-wage, low-skilled migrants, often poorly educated from outside of Europe, who we now know, thanks to places like the Office for Budget Responsibility, a kind of a government quango, which has finally acknowledged that these people coming into Britain are taking more out of the economy than they're putting in, because they're typically going into low-paid jobs, low-wage jobs. You know, they're becoming delivery drivers. They're working in the service sector. They're not basically building a dynamic, productive, high GDP per capita economy, which is one of the reasons why our economy is flatlining. So Boris Johnson and Priti Patel preside over this disaster zone, okay, which is now giving us, on average, bringing us migrants that are costing you, the British taxpayer, about £465,000 over the course of their lifetime, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is insane, right? It's completely insane. But what we now know this week, February 2025, thanks to a new report from the Centre for Policy Studies, is the overall cost of that mass influx of people who have come in under Boris Johnson, Priti Patel in the early months of the Labour government. And the overall cost is £234 billion. Because what's happening is those people who are coming in are bringing their relatives, right? I'll give you an example. If you look at the health and social care system, and I can't really believe this number, I had to go and check it, which I did, and it's true. We gave out visas, okay, to 270,000 migrants to work in low-skill, low-wage jobs in the social care system. And let's be honest, we need workers in the social care system because that system is not reforming itself. So we need to be paying British people more money to work in it. We need to be radically reforming that system. Now, until we do that, until the firms do that and the government does that, what they're doing is they're relying on cheap migrant labor to plug the holes. So we gave out visas, check this, 270,000 low-skilled, low-wage migrants between 2021 and 2024, who brought with them 270,000, who brought with them 377,000 relatives. Like, it's insane. So they brought over, I shouldn't be laughing, 377,000 relatives. Nigeria, Zimbabwe, China, Pakistan, India. At the same time, we handed out 1.7 million visas to students who brought 344,000 relatives with them. Right? Now, these students, I'm not talking about PhD students at Oxford and Cambridge here. I'm talking about people who mainly went into non-elite, less prestigious universities outside of the top tier universities. You know, they're going to the University of Greenwich, Essex, Sussex, you know, polytechnics. They're bringing relatives over. They're often doing 1 or 2 year MA programs, and then they're flipping over into a worker visa program. And then they're becoming, you know, Just Eat drivers and delivery drivers, and they're kind of ending up in this, you know, poorly paid service sector, you know, where, to be frank, they're often being exploited by poor working conditions, and nobody wants that. But the key point in all of this is we're giving out these mind-boggling numbers of visas to people who are not even earning the average wage and are certainly not driving up a dynamic economy. Now, here's why all this matters. Because of all the people that have come in under Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, a large number of them, about 1.7 million, are going to get something called the indefinite right to remain. The indefinite leave to remain, it's called, from January 2026, which means if you've been in Britain for 5 years, currently, you can apply for this thing called indefinite leave to remain in the country forever. And if you get that, then you basically get access to the NHS, get access to social care, get access to universal credit, get access to the welfare system, get access for the right to apply for student loans and university grants, get the right to bring more relatives into the country who then in turn apply for this indefinite leave to remain. You get the right to apply for citizenship after a year. And if you have kids, they become automatically British citizens. So what I'm saying is that if you actually look at what's going to happen over the next few years, the Boris wave of migrants are all going to start applying for indefinite leave to remain, which is going to give them access to the state, welfare, and everything else, which again, because they're not net contributors, but they're taking more out of the economy already, is going to end up with this massive bill for British taxpayers of 234 billion. Now, what's even more shocking than that, as a colleague of mine at the Centre for Policy Studies, Carl Williams, has shown, is that nobody in the British state is even thinking about it. You know, last week I wrote a piece on what the British population is going to look like over the next 10, 20, 30 years over at the Substack newsletter, mattgoodwin.org. And I showed the government forecasts, which basically make clear that between today and 2047, another 10 million people are coming into Britain, which is not actually a long period of time. That's about 22 years, right? So if you've got a 3-year-old today, by the time they're 25, again, not a long time to go, we've got another 10 million people in this country. That's another London, okay? It's another London, but it's bigger than London. So no one's thinking about how we're going to manage that population change, and nobody in government is thinking about how we're going to manage all the costs that are going to come from giving, you know, millions of people indefinite leave to remain. Now, the Centre for Policy Studies estimate that currently between 742,000 and 1.2 million of the recent migrants are going to be eligible for this indefinite leave to remain. What that means, stick with me here, is as we go forward, between 570 and 1,000 people every day are going to be granted indefinite leave to remain. Okay, between 570 and 1,000 people every day. Now, in the 2010s, it was 327 people. Now, basically, we're going to be doing this at 3 times the rate as what we saw in the 2010s. Now, our leaders, if they wanted to, they could stop this from happening. Lots of things they could do. They could extend the period that you need to be in Britain, working in Britain, to apply for this indefinite leave to remain. They could extend it from 5 years to 10 years to 15 years, right, if they wanted to. They could make it impossible to get that indefinite leave to remain if you haven't paid into the tax pot, if you've not had a job and you've been paying tax. And we could ask them to show us their tax returns to get proof of it. If you've got a criminal record, if you've been in social housing, if you've been on benefits, you shouldn't really be getting indefinite leave to remain. Now, these are some of the ideas that some politicians have started to put forward. I think they need to go much further than the ideas they've been put forward. And Yvette Cooper, the Labour Home Secretary, needs to basically change the criteria for indefinite leave to remain ASAP to avoid us having to pay this bill. Now, Labour did change indefinite leave to remain in the 2000s. They extended it by a year, I think a year or two under Charles Clarke. They could do this again if they really wanted to. More fundamentally, we could also be building an immigration policy in this country that actually delivers lower migration, but better quality, high skill migration. Like, if you agree with me that we need to basically reduce the amount of migration in this country to somewhere between 50,000 to 100,000 net every year, from nearly 1 million a year today. So if we take it all the way back to basically where it was in the late 1990s, but those people are A, coming from culturally compatible nations in Europe, and B, high skill, productive contributors who are helping to drive our economy, then I think we get into a much stronger position as an overall society. And we could do a whole bunch of things to encourage that. We could revise how we're issuing visas. We could start only issuing visas to younger people who have the right qualifications. We could raise the salary thresholds to get people in who are only coming in to do really good jobs. And if we don't do all of this, I think Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And, the one thing I say in my Substack, I'm just going to read it to you because I feel really passionately about this because I'm absolutely outraged by this. It is neither right nor fair to impose these enormous costs on the hard-working, tax-paying British public whose families have contributed to these islands for generations. Okay, that going ahead with the mass permanent resettlement of potentially millions of people from overseas who will impose net fiscal costs on the British people that will run into the hundreds of billions is not just bad economics, which it is morally unjust. Okay, so what you could do, you could write to your MP and you could say, I want you to extend the indefinite leave to remain period. You could send them a copy of my Substack if you want to send them that with your email. It's got all the links in for the evidence. But this specific thing within the immigration system has to change. It has to change now. Because if it doesn't, we've got some enormous eye-watering costs coming down the line, not just for us, but for our kids and their kids. And I think that is absolutely bang out of order. Hit like and subscribe if you found this content helpful and useful. Join me on X. Join us over at the Substack, mattgoodwin.org. You get all of this stuff straight to your email. Most of it's for free. See you soon. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Bye-bye.